My phone buzzed with Michael's usual text message at 6:47 p.m. on a Friday evening. Landed safely in Chicago. Long day of meetings tomorrow. Miss you already. Love you, beautiful. I smiled while reading it. The same warm feeling I'd experienced for 5 years whenever my husband sent his travel updates. Michael Stevens was nothing if not consistent about checking in during his business trips, which happened 15 days every month for his position as a regional sales manager at Pinnacle Technologies. What Michael didn't know was that I'd planned a surprise visit to Chicago for our anniversary weekend. I'd booked a flight, reserved a table at his favorite restaurant, and even packed the red dress he bought me last Christmas. The plan was simple. Show up at his hotel Saturday morning with coffee and pastries, spend the weekend exploring the city together, and celebrate 5 years of marriage in the place where we'd had our honeymoon. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear in Chicago. I'd taken the 6:30 a.m. flight from Denver, landed at O'Hare by 8:45, and caught a taxi directly to the Marriott downtown where Michael always stayed during his Chicago visits. The lobby was elegant and busy with weekend travelers, the kind of upscale atmosphere that made business trips feel less lonely. I approached the front desk with a confident smile, rolling my small suitcase behind me. "Good morning," I said to the young woman behind the counter. "Could you please ring Michael Stevens' room? I'm his wife, here to surprise him." The desk clerk's fingers moved across her keyboard, her expression shifting from helpful to confused. She tried again, checking different spellings, different dates. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said finally. "We don't have anyone registered under the name Michael Stevens. Are you sure this is the correct hotel?" My stomach dropped. "Yes, he always stays here. He's been coming to Chicago for business every month for 3 years. Michael Stevens from Pinnacle Technologies." She checked again, her expression genuinely apologetic. "I've searched every variation of that name, and I've been working here for 2 years. I would remember a regular guest." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through months of text messages from Michael. "Look, he sent me photos of this lobby just 2 weeks ago." The photos were definitely from this hotel. The distinctive marble columns and crystal chandelier unmistakable. The desk clerk studied the images, nodding. "This is definitely our lobby, but I can assure you we have no guest by that name." Something cold settled in my chest as I walked to the hotel bar, needing a moment to process what had just happened. I ordered coffee and sat in a corner booth, staring at my phone. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of monthly business trips to Chicago, and the hotel had no record of my husband ever staying there. I scrolled through our text conversations, looking for any detail I might have missed. Every message was consistent. "Arrived safely, meetings went well, flying home tomorrow." Photos of Chicago streets, the hotel lobby, room service meals. All proving he was here, but apparently not under his own name. The coffee grew cold as I tried to rationalize what I'd learned. Maybe the hotel made a mistake. Maybe Michael booked under a corporate account that the desk clerk couldn't access. Maybe there was some perfectly reasonable explanation that would make this all make sense. I decided to try a different approach. Walking back to the front desk, I showed the clerk one of Michael's photos from the hotel room. "This was taken in one of your rooms 2 weeks ago. Could you check your guest registry for that date?" She examined the photo carefully, noting the room number visible on the door in the reflection of the mirror. "Room 1247, she said. "Let me check who was registered there on March 15th. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, and I held my breath. March 15th, room 1247 was registered to James Walker, staying for 3 nights. James Walker, a name I'd never heard my husband mention. "Could you describe this James Walker?" I asked, my voice barely steady. The clerk hesitated, clearly sensing something was wrong. "I can't share guest information, but..." She paused, looking around to make sure we weren't overheard. "He's been a regular guest for about 3 years. Always very polite, always tips well. Mid-30s, brown hair, about 6 feet tall." The description matched Michael perfectly. "Does he travel alone?" I asked. Another pause. "Ma'am, I really shouldn't be sharing this information." I slid a $20 bill across the counter. "Please. I think my husband is having an affair, and I need to know the truth." She pocketed the money and leaned closer. "He usually travels with a woman. Same woman for the past year or so. They seem very comfortable together, like a married couple." I spent the next hour in the hotel bathroom, crying and trying to make sense of what I'd learned. My husband of 5 years was living a double life in Chicago under the name James Walker, apparently with another woman. The man who called me every night from his business trips, who sent me photos and souvenirs, who talked about missing me and counting days until he came home, was simultaneously living as someone else entirely. I pulled myself together and called Michael's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Hey sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. "I was thinking about you and wondered how your meetings are going. Call me when you get a chance." Instead of waiting for his call, I decided to investigate further. I walked to the hotel restaurant where Michael had sent me photos of his meals during previous trips. The hostess was friendly and talkative, especially after I mentioned being a regular guest's wife. "Oh, are you Mrs. Walker?" she asked brightly. "Your husband is such a gentleman. He talks about you all the time." "Mrs. Walker." My legs felt weak. "Yes," I managed. "That's me." "He's not here this weekend though. They usually come the third weekend of every month." "They? His business partner?" I asked. She laughed. "Business partner? No, his wife. Beautiful woman, red hair, always so sweet together. Very romantic couple." The hostess continued talking, unaware that each word was destroying my world. "They had their anniversary dinner here last month. Mr. Walker ordered champagne, very romantic. He told me they'd been married 2 years. Such a lovely couple. 2 years. James Walker had married someone else 2 years into my marriage with Michael. I excused myself and found a quiet corner of the lobby to call my sister Emma. "Em, I need you to do something for me without asking questions," I said when she answered. "I need you to run a background check on someone named James Walker in Chicago." Emma worked for a private investigation firm and had access to databases I couldn't reach. "Zara, what's going on? Just do this for me, please. I'll explain later." I gave her what details I had. Approximate age, physical description, and the fact that he'd been staying at the Marriott downtown regularly for 3 years. While waiting for Emma's call back, I positioned myself in the lobby where I could see the elevators, hoping against hope that this was all some massive misunderstanding. Maybe Michael was registered under a corporate account. Maybe there was some explanation that would make sense of everything I discovered. The lobby bustled with weekend guests, families checking in for vacations, business travelers like my husband who lived double lives. At 2:30 p.m. my phone rang. "Zara," Emma's voice was tight with concern. "I found your James Walker. Are you sitting down?" I wasn't, but I found a chair quickly. "Tell me." James Walker, 34 years old, lives at 1247 Lakeshore Drive in Chicago. He's married to Rebecca Walker, maiden name Rebecca Chen. They've been married for 2 years. "Zara, this isn't some coincidence. This man has built a complete life here." "There's more," Emma continued. "James Walker works as a financial advisor at Merrill Lynch downtown. No connection to any company called Pinnacle Technologies. His employment history shows he's been at Merrill Lynch for 4 years, which means he started there a year into your marriage." I hung up and immediately Googled James Walker Chicago. His LinkedIn profile appeared instantly, showing a professional headshot that was unmistakably my husband. Same face, same smile, but completely different career and background. According to the profile, James had been a financial advisor for 4 years and was married to Rebecca, a graphic designer. His professional summary described him as a dedicated family man who enjoyed traveling with his wife and building long-term client relationships. There were recommendations from colleagues praising his integrity and commitment. The irony was suffocating. I spent another hour researching, finding social media profiles that painted a picture of a loving couple who traveled together, celebrated anniversaries, and had apparently built a life together while I thought I was building one with the same man back in Denver. Photos showed them at restaurants I recognized from Michael's business trip updates, at events he described as company dinners, living a completely parallel existence to the life I thought we shared. Rebecca's Instagram showed their relationship timeline clearly. Photos from their wedding 2 years ago, vacation pictures from places Michael had claimed to visit for business conferences, anniversary celebrations that coincided with weekends he'd told me he was working. One photo particularly caught my attention. Rebecca wearing earrings identical to ones Michael had given me for our 4th anniversary, claiming he'd picked them up during a layover. My phone finally rang at 4:15 p.m. Michael's name appeared on the screen. "Hey beautiful." His voice was warm and familiar. "Sorry I missed your call. Meetings ran late, and I was thinking about grabbing dinner before turning in early. How are the meetings going?" I asked, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. "Pretty productive. The Chicago account is challenging, but I think we're making progress." I was staring at his LinkedIn profile as James Walker while he lied effortlessly about meetings that didn't exist for a company that had never employed him. "Michael," I said carefully, "what's the name of your hotel again?" "The usual place, the Marriott downtown. Same room I always get, you know how I am about consistency." The same room he shared with Rebecca Walker every month. "Are you eating alone tonight?" I asked. "Of course, sweetheart. You know business dinners aren't my thing. I'll probably just order room service and call you later." According to the hotel staff, James and Rebecca Walker had dinner reservations at the hotel restaurant every Saturday night when they visited. They were regulars known by name, treated like the married couple they apparently were. I hung up feeling nauseated. 5 years of marriage, and I apparently didn't know the most basic facts about my husband's life. He wasn't just having an affair. He was living a completely different existence as a different person. The scope of the deception was staggering. This wasn't a weekend fling or a business trip romance. This was a carefully constructed parallel life that had been running alongside our marriage for years. I booked a room at the same hotel for Saturday night, determined to see this double life with my own eyes. The same hotel clerk who'd helped me earlier processed my reservation with sympathy in her eyes. "I hope everything works out for you," she said quietly, clearly understanding more than she could officially acknowledge. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my room, alternating between anger and disbelief, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. At 7:30 p.m., I positioned myself in the hotel bar with a clear view of the restaurant entrance. I'd changed into dark clothes and a baseball cap, feeling ridiculous for spying on my own husband but desperate to understand the scope of his deception. The bar was dimly lit and crowded enough that I could observe without being noticed. At 8:15 p.m., I saw him walking toward the restaurant with a beautiful red-haired woman. He was wearing the blue shirt I'd given him for his birthday, the one he said was his favorite. They were holding hands, laughing about something, looking for all the world like a couple celebrating their weekend together. She was stunning, probably in her late 20s, with the kind of effortless grace that suggested she was used to being the center of attention. They moved together with the comfortable intimacy of people who'd shared countless similar evenings. I watched them through the restaurant window for over an hour. They shared appetizers, fed each other dessert, and maintained the kind of intimate conversation that couples develop over years together. He used the same hand gestures I'd seen at our dinner table, the same expressions I thought were uniquely ours. At one point, she showed him something on her phone that made him throw his head back and laugh, the same laugh I heard when he found something genuinely amusing at home. They looked happy. They looked married. They looked like they belonged together. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was how natural they seemed together, how easily he inhabited this other life. This wasn't an act he was putting on for a weekend affair. This was another version of himself, apparently just as genuine as the Michael I knew. When they left the restaurant, I followed at a distance as they walked to the elevators. I heard her say, "I love our Chicago weekends, James. It feels like we're on a permanent honeymoon." He kissed her forehead and replied, "2 more years until we can do this full time." 2 more years until what? I took the next elevator up and watched from around a corner as they entered the same room Michael had photographed for his business trip updates to me. I spent that night in my hotel room, alternating between crying and researching everything I could find about James and Rebecca Walker's life together. Their social media showed a relationship timeline that overlapped completely with my marriage to Michael. I found their wedding announcement in the Chicago Tribune from 2 years ago, describing how financial advisor James Walker had married graphic designer Rebecca Chun in an intimate ceremony at the Art Institute. The wedding photo showed a celebration I'd never known existed. Michael, or James, in a tuxedo I'd never seen, exchanging vows with a woman who clearly believed she was marrying an honest man. Rebecca's dress was beautiful, her smile radiant, her happiness genuine. Looking at those photos, I realized she was as much a victim of his deception as I was. Neither of us knew we were sharing the same man. I found vacation photos that explained so many of Michael's mysterious business trips over the years. The conference in Miami that had actually been a romantic getaway with Rebecca. The extended meeting in San Francisco that included photos of them at wineries I'd never heard him mention. The emergency work situation in Las Vegas that had apparently involved a couple's massage and poolside champagne service. Every trip, every excuse, every business emergency had been carefully orchestrated to maintain two separate lives. The planning required must have been exhausting. Different phones, different email addresses, different social circles, different versions of himself. Yet he'd managed it seamlessly for years, never missing a beat in either life. The next morning I called Emma back. "I need you to investigate Michael Stevens now," I said. "I need to know if my husband even exists." The results came back within hours. Michael Stevens, the man I'd married, had a valid social security number and Denver address. But his employment with Pinnacle Technologies was fabricated. The company existed, but had no record of employing anyone named Michael Stevens. Emma's investigation revealed that Michael's references, his corporate credit card, his business cards were all fake. His supposed supervisor at Pinnacle Technologies was actually a phone service that took messages and forwarded them to another number. His corporate email address was privately owned and operated. Even his office building visits were staged. He'd rented temporary office space on the days he needed to bring me by for company events. "Zara," Emma said during our phone call, "this level of deception suggests professional experience. This isn't someone who decided to have an affair and got creative. This is someone who knows how to construct false identities systematically." The implication was terrifying. If Michael could create two complete lives so successfully, how many others might there be? How many women might be married to versions of the same man? I flew back to Denver Sunday evening with a head full of questions and a marriage full of lies. Michael was waiting at the airport with flowers and his usual warm smile. "How was your weekend, beautiful? I missed you like crazy." I hugged him back, studying his face for any sign of deception, any hint of the man who'd been feeding another woman dessert 24 hours earlier. There was nothing. He was perfectly convincingly the Michael I'd known for 5 years. "How was Chicago?" I asked as we drove home. "Same old business meetings," he replied. "Nothing exciting. I'm just glad to be home with you." I looked at this man I thought I knew completely, who apparently lived two entirely separate lives with two different women, and realized I had no idea who he really was. The stranger sitting beside me had shared my bed for 5 years while sharing another woman's bed in Chicago. He'd celebrated anniversaries with both of us, probably on the same weekends. "Tell me about the meetings," I said, testing his ability to maintain the fiction. "Oh, the usual corporate politics. The regional manager is pushing for increased sales targets, but the market conditions aren't supporting aggressive expansion." I spent most of Friday trying to mediate between sales and marketing departments. The lies flowed effortlessly, supported by details that suggested he'd prepared answers for questions I might ask. That night, as Michael slept beside me, I began planning my own investigation. If he could maintain two complete identities, I could certainly conduct a discreet inquiry into the scope of his deception. I contacted a private investigator the next morning, someone Emma recommended who specialized in marriage fraud and identity deception. Within a week, I had a team monitoring both Michael Stevens in Denver and James Walker in Chicago. The investigation revealed even more than I'd feared. Michael maintained a third identity as Mark Wilson in Phoenix, where he spent the weekends he claimed to be attending regional conferences. Mark Wilson was single, dating a woman named Lisa who believed she was in an exclusive relationship with a marketing consultant who traveled frequently for business. The 3 women in his life each knew a different version of the same man, each believing they had exclusive access to his time and attention. The financial investigation was equally shocking. Michael had been systematically transferring money from our joint accounts to fund his other lives. The business trip expenses I'd been supporting were actually funding romantic getaways with Rebecca and Lisa. The company credit card he used was connected to an account I'd been unknowingly funding through automatic transfers he'd set up from our savings. He'd opened credit cards in all 3 names, using different addresses and employment information. He'd purchased cars for his other identities, rented apartments for Rebecca in Chicago and Lisa in Phoenix, and maintained 3 completely separate financial lives. The debt he'd accumulated across all three identities totaled over $200,000, much of it backed by assets from our supposedly shared life in Denver. The investigator also uncovered his system for managing communication between identities. He used different phones for each life, but all forwarded to a central number he monitored. He created elaborate scheduling systems to ensure he never double-booked himself, and had backup stories prepared for any unexpected changes. The level of organization required suggested he'd been practicing this deception for years, possibly before I'd ever met him. 2 months after my Chicago discovery, I had enough evidence to bury Michael Stevens, James Walker, and Mark Wilson permanently. I'd documented the identity fraud, the financial deception, the marriage fraud, and the systematic theft of funds from our joint accounts. I'd also discovered that he'd been using my identity information to establish some of his false credentials, making me an unwitting accomplice to federal crimes. The confrontation came on a Friday evening when Michael returned from another supposed business trip to Chicago. I was waiting in the living room with printed copies of everything I'd discovered. The wedding photos of James and Rebecca, the vacation pictures from Phoenix with Lisa, the financial records showing years of systematic theft, and the federal investigation paperwork I'd already filed. "Welcome home, Michael," I said as he walked through the door. "Or should I call you James? Or Mark?" The color drained from his face as he saw the paper spread across our coffee table. For the first time in 5 years, Michael Stevens had nothing to say. The man who'd maintained 3 elaborate deceptions simultaneously was finally speechless. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly, sitting down across from me. 2 months. Long enough to document everything and file federal charges for identity fraud, marriage fraud, and financial theft. I handed him a copy of the investigation report. "You're married to 3 different women, Michael. 3 women who each believe they're in exclusive relationships with you. 3 women whose lives you've systematically destroyed." He read through the report silently, his face growing paler with each page. "Zara, you have to understand it started as a mistake. I never meant for it to go this far." "Which part was the mistake, Michael? Marrying Rebecca while married to me? Creating Mark Wilson to seduce Lisa? Or stealing $200,000 to fund your other lives?" "I can explain everything," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Explain this," I said, showing him photos of Rebecca's latest Instagram posts. "Your wife in Chicago is pregnant. She's 5 months along with what she believes is her first child with her loving husband James Walker. Were you planning to be a father to that child, while maintaining your other 2 identities?" The pregnancy news was a recent discovery that had pushed me from anger to fury. He was bringing children into his web of deception. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he said, which was possibly the most ridiculous statement anyone had ever made after systematically deceiving 3 women for years. "You didn't just hurt us, Michael. You destroyed our lives. Rebecca thinks she's married to a financial advisor who adores her. Lisa thinks she's in love with a marketing consultant who's planning to move to Phoenix permanently. I thought I was married to a sales manager who traveled for business." I handed him the final papers. Divorce documents, federal charges, and restraining orders that would prevent him from contacting any of the 3 women he'd been deceiving. "The FBI is interested in your case, Michael. Apparently, using multiple identities to commit marriage and financial fraud is a federal crime. They're particularly interested in the credit cards you opened using my identity information." "What happens now?" he asked, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen him. "Now you face the consequences of being 3 different people who all committed serious crimes. The FBI estimates you'll serve between 8 and 12 years in federal prison. Rebecca's filed for an annulment and is seeking child support under her husband's real name. Lisa's pressing charges for emotional distress and fraud. And I'm taking everything you stole from me, plus punitive damages." The last thing I said to Michael Stevens before he was arrested was something I'd been saving for months. "You thought you were smart enough to be 3 different people. Turns out you weren't smart enough to be one honest person." He was led away in handcuffs 3 days later, and I never saw him again. The aftermath took 2 years to resolve. Michael pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges, and was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Rebecca divorced him and moved back to California with their son, whom she named after her father instead of the man who deceived her. Lisa relocated to Seattle and started therapy to recover from what her doctor termed systematic psychological abuse. I kept the Denver house, recovered most of the stolen money through federal restitution programs, and started a support group for women who'd been victims of marriage fraud. The group grew quickly, suggesting that my experience wasn't as unique as I'd hoped. Apparently, there were enough men living double lives to support weekly meetings. 5 years later, I'm remarried to a man whose background I verified through 3 different investigation services before our second date. It sounds paranoid, but once you've been married to someone who doesn't exist, you develop a healthy appreciation for verifiable facts. My new husband finds my caution amusing rather than insulting, which suggests he's secure enough in his own identity to understand mine. Michael Stevens, James Walker, and Mark Wilson are all serving time in federal prison for crimes they committed while trying to be everything to everyone. The man who couldn't be faithful to one woman discovered that the federal government doesn't appreciate citizens with multiple identities and stolen credit. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the natural consequences of their choices. I didn't destroy Michael's lives. I just made sure all 3 of them were held accountable for what one man had done.